Hello and welcome back to this video series where we're looking at building an e-commerce platform in 25 days using Next, Netlify, and Stripe. Awesome. Okay, so this is going to be our last video in the React Basics part of this course. And in this video, we're going to look at using useEffect, which is another hook that React gives us that we can use to kind of subscribe to changes to other bits of data. So we can say, whenever this bit of data changes, we want to know about it. But before we jump too much into that, I just wanted to go over some of the changes that I've made just to get us up and running for this example. I've created a new Pokemon component and a use Pokemon hook. They're inside a file called Pokemon in our components folder. This was kind of just thrown together, and yeah, it's full of a whole bunch of scary looking stuff that we don't need to worry about yet. So feel free to read through that if you really want, but you don't really need to know anything about it because all we're doing is calling that hook and getting back a list of Pokemon and then a function that we can use to add Pokemon to that list. And then down the bottom here, we're just rendering out our Pokemon and passing that down as a prop. Okay, so now that we've covered that, we don't need to think about Pokemon. I assure you there won't be any Pokemon in this video at all, so just forget about everything you just saw. This video is about how we can subscribe to changes in data. And so first thing we're going to do is bring in our useEffect hook from React. So we're already bringing in useState inside these curly brackets, so we can just say comma and bring in useEffect as well. And then this is going to be a function that we're going to call. So we're going to do this after we've done our useState and... Oh, Pokemon? What? I don't know what you're talking about. We're going to call useEffect, and then useEffect has a few different parts. So the first part is a callback function. So we pass it a function. We can just do an arrow function here. And then inside here, this is going to be the things we want to do, or the things we want to run when something changes. Okay, so the next thing we need to specify is which variables do we actually care about listening to? So what do we want to subscribe to changes on? And so as a second parameter to useEffect, so this is the first parameter, this arrow function, and then the second parameter is going to be a dependency array. So this is anytime anything in this array changes, it's going to run this function for us again. So in here we can just say this is the thing to subscribe to. So obviously this isn't going to compile or run, but just this is the thing that we want to subscribe to, and when that thing changes, we want to run whatever is in this callback. So then the last thing, which I'm going to just briefly cover, but probably won't be as relevant to what we're doing here, is that from useEffect, we can also return another arrow function. And so what this arrow function does is it does all of the cleanup. So if we were to let's say add event listeners or create a timer, like something that's ticking and running every X amount of time, we might want to clean that up and either cancel that timer or remove those event listeners or whatever. And so by returning an arrow function from useEffect, we can kind of do any of the cleanup activities that we might want to do. In this example, we're not going to need that, so I'm going to get rid of it. So we have the ability to subscribe to changes on something and then run some functionality when those changes happen. So if we have a look at our super awesome application, we're getting an error because the thing to subscribe to is not defined. So let's just get rid of that and save. And then if we go back to our browser, we see our awesome application. We have our buttons, and as we click them, our buttons remember how many times they've been clicked, and we have this total number of clicks. So what if we wanted to build in a super awesome feature where anytime we click any of the buttons, a Pokemon spawns at the top of the screen and falls down to the bottom of the screen? What? Pokemon? Where did that come from? I didn't know anything about Pokemon. That's exactly what this add Pokemon function does. So why don't we call that add Pokemon function inside our useEffect? Then I'm going to save this and head back over to the browser and refresh. Oh, and there goes Jigglypuff. But Jigglypuff isn't going to fall again, and no one else is going to fall again unless I refresh again. And there goes Meowth. Right, so we probably don't want our users to sit here having to refresh every single time. So this add Pokemon function is never going to be called again because we haven't told it to pay attention to any changes on any variables. So right now we're not subscribed to anything, so this add Pokemon function is going to be called the first time our component is mounted, but then it's never going to run again. So if we want this to run every single time the total num of clicks changes, we just need to add that to this dependency array. And again, if we save and go back to our application and refresh, we see our one scythe fall down the screen. And then if we start clicking our buttons, we see lots of Pokemon. Now this is pretty awesome, but every time we refresh, we're seeing a Pokemon fall from the top. And so this probably is a little bit confusing if you were using this application, because then they seem to trigger every time you click buttons, but for some reason they also trigger when you refresh the page. And this is because we're listening to changes on total num of clicks, and the first time that this variable is created, this total num of clicks variable, we're telling it to initialize to the value 0. And so this 0 is setting to total num of clicks, which is triggering our useEffect and calling our add Pokemon function. And so if we didn't want to add a new Pokemon on that first render, all we'd need to do is add an if statement here to say if total num of clicks is greater than 0, then we want to call our add Pokemon function. So now when the user refreshes our page, this total num of clicks will be set to 0. That's then going to trigger this useEffect, but we're going to evaluate this if statement and say if total nums of clicks is greater than 0, then call this function. But total number of clicks is going to be exactly equal to 0, which is not greater than 0. So therefore it's just going to ignore this statement. The second time through, when we click that button again, it's going to update the total num of clicks to be the value 1. And then again, that's going to trigger this useEffect because total number of clicks has changed. We're going to evaluate that if statement, but then total number of clicks is going to be equal to 1, which is greater than 0. So then we're going to call this add Pokemon function. And if we head over to our app and refresh, we can refresh a couple of times and we'll see that no Pokemon are falling. But then as we start clicking, oh my god, we get Pokemon. Look at all those beautiful Pokemon. And that's how we can use useEffect to subscribe to changes on variables and run some kind of functionality somewhere else. So that brings us to the end of our first section. So we have now covered the React basics. So knowing how to componentize your UI, manage state within a component, pass props between components, and trigger side effects based on changes to that state is sort of the fundamental building blocks of React. So in the next video, we'll be moving on to the next section of our course, which is all about next.js, which is a framework that sits on top of React and gives us some really cool things like static site generation. I'll see you there.